Welcome back again, Gloria. We have Dr. Gloria Jean Moore, the author of the Anglo Indian Vision. We are now at chapter 3, The Brave and the Prejudiced. So, Gloria, let's start with the Anglo Indian position and as the growing race.
Right. By the 1750s, Anglo Indians vastly outnumbered the Europeans in India. Not just the British, but Europeans in India, they outnumbered them. So you can see that that policy had been very successful in growing their numbers, in propping up what was going to be the Raj, right? So this accumulation of their numbers finally created a sense of unease. And in 1791, I think it was, very far away in the Caribbean, there was an uprising of people of that country against the French who occupied it. This was a slave uprising. As you can imagine, slaves were not well treated. They rose up against the French, and there was a revolution. A certain Viscount Valentia, after this revolution, wrote, "The greatest evil," I think he might have mentioned Bengal, but probably India, is the vast accumulation of numbers of children, our children. He called them by another name, but not Anglo-Indian. It may be called them Eurasian children. This is a huge increase, and what may not be feared from them in the future. Without the indolence of the Indians, who knows what they might do? They might rise up against us. Do you know that this was 200 years after the British arrived in India, 300 after the Portuguese didn't do it. The British, having for 200 years relied upon this group for their growth, for their security, for their trade, they suddenly, after this Viscount Valentia wrote that, they brought out a series of very, very harsh discriminatory edicts. The first one was that Anglo-Indian children, particularly boys, could not go to England for their education. They needed to do that and to go to the highest colleges and schools in that country so they could come back and then enter the ranks of the East India Company at a high position. Without that, they couldn't get into those positions. They were stopped from going there, right? The second edict was about them entering civilian life and where they could live and whether they could own land. And that was also crippling. And the third one would turn out to be the most disastrous of all. It was absolute folly. They were banned from any positions in the armies above musicians, fifers and drummers. All of a sudden, in one fell swoop, the people who had been loyal to them for 200 years were kicked out of everything that could have helped them have a good position, have a living wage, having a good education. It was a period of them facing the wilderness years. And I think it was a disgrace. So you can see that it isn't just the Jews who have been discriminated against. People don't know that Anglo-Indians were exposed to that by the British from the late 1790s onwards. And they faced a period of great deprivation, of poverty, but they rallied and they helped one another. They became inventive. They found ways around getting a living, and they also, most importantly, organized politically. Within 25 years, I think, they had formed an organization and they had got together a petition in 1829. This was taken by a man called John Ricketts. He was a leader of that group, to London, to the British Parliament. It was called the East Indian Petition. He would later be a judge. He was an outstanding man. He took this to the Parliament in Britain, and do you know it had its effect? In 1833, the East India Company put out a new charter, and in that charter, prejudice of any kind based on race and religion was banned. Now this was wonderful in the statute books, wonderful on paper, but in real life, did it happen? I'll leave you to guess. But however, at last Anglo-Indians could again creep into the positions that they had had for 200 years. I must say that men who had been born to a military life some of them had moved into the armies of the Indian princes, Holkar, Scindia, Gwalior. They they definitely were not traitors. They would not fight against the British. They would do reconnaissance if any of those princes fought the British, but where there was a battle, they refused to fight against men who could be their fathers, their grandfathers, their great-grandfathers in the European armies. And in one instance, a prince called Holkar, my grandfather worked in, many years later in his state in the police. Holkar, 3 men, Colonel Vickers, a man called Dodd, and another man called Ryan, who had refused to fight. They were executed, and their heads were put on lances in front of Holkar's tent, just to let everybody know, if you don't fight with us, whatever your filial obligations, this is what's going to happen to you. But it does go to show you that although they found other occupation, they would not fight against their own flesh and blood, whatever, So, yeah, so now I want to hark back a little to, there were very important people at that time, and I will elaborate more on them. Well, certainly Ricketts was one. There was a wonderful scholar called De Rosio. There was the famous man called James Skinner, who raised his own regiment, Skinner's Horse. It's still a regiment in the Indian Army with tanks, not horses. Now, they all found ways to get around these terrible restrictions, But I want to just talk about others who we don't know about, but who somehow crept into the British establishment. And we come to talking about blood. You may not know it, but Princess Diana, that beautiful Princess Diana, actually had an Anglo-Indian in her ancestry. In the late 1700s, there was Eliza Kewark, Kewark, who married into the Spencer family, and that line produced finally Diana Spencer and Princes William and Harry. And there was an article in the newspaper a friend sent me where it says William and Harry have Indian ancestry. So Meghan Markle was not the first to bring coloured blood into the royal family. That's something to bear in mind.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Gloria.